Hello all. Today we'll be going over some HTML and PHP files. Beginning with this example, we'll be writing a script that inputs a line of text, tokenizes it with string method split, and outputs the tokens in reverse order. On line 13, we create a label element with the text enter a sentence. The for attribute right over here specifies the ID of the input element it is associated with. In line 14, okay, now moving on to line 14, we create an input element of type text with the ID input. Users can enter text into this input field. On line 16, we create a button element with the text reverse tokens. When clicked, it triggers the JavaScript function reverse tokens. On line 17, so this line, we create a paragraph element with the ID output. This is where the reverse tokens will be displayed. In lines 18 through 26, so within the script element, we define the JavaScript function reverse token. When called, it retrieves the input text from the input field, splits it into tokens using a space as a delimiter. It reverses the order of the tokens and displays the reverse tokens in the paragraph element with the ID output. Now let's take a look at how this program runs from our local host. Over here, we have the output. In our next program, we'll be writing a script based on a program from an exercise within the textbook. This program will input several lines of text and uses a string method, index of, to determine the total number of occurrences of each letter of the alphabet in the text. Uppercase and lowercase letters will be counted together. We will store the totals for each letter in an array and print the values in tabular format in an HTML5 text area after the totals have been determined. So on line 17, we define a function search key. This function will be called when the submit button is clicked. In lines 20 through 24, we declare variables and retrieve values from the HTML input field and text area for further processing. In line 27, we start a loop that iterates over each alphabet letter. In lines 29 through 30, We initialize variables to count occurrences and search for each alphabet letter in the user input. In line 33, this line starts a nested loop that iterates over each character in the user input. In lines 35 through 39, we increment the occurrences count each time the current alphabet letter is found in the user input. In lines 42 through 46, we update the text area with the result showing the number of occurrences for each alphabet letter. In line 52, this line starts a form element with some attributes like action, method name, and ID. In line 53, so this line displays a heading indicating the purpose of the form. In line 54, we display a label prompting the user to enter input. Line 55 creates a text input field where the user can enter text. Line 57 creates a button labeled submit that when clicked triggers the search key function. Line 59, this line displays a heading indicating the results section. And lastly, line 61 creates a text area where the result will be displayed. Now let's run the file. And there we have it. So in hello world, D occurs one time, E occurs one time, H once, L 3 times, so 1, 2, 3, O 2 times, 1, 2, R once, W once. In our next program, we'll be printing dates in various formats. To do this, we'll be writing a script that reads a date from an HTML5 form and creates a date object to store it. Then we'll use the various methods of the date object that convert dates into strings to display the date in several formats. So on line 15 within the form element and also the body of the program, we have a label element. This is going to allow users to click on the label to focus on the input field. On line 16, an input element with type date is created, or we create an input element of type date where users can enter a date. In line 18, a button element with type button right over here triggers the display date function when clicked. In line 21, a paragraph element with an ID of output is provided to display the formatted date. And lines 22 through 31. Within the script block, we have a JavaScript function, display date, This retrieves the date entered by the user from the input field within the ID date. It also creates a new date object based on user input. Okay. It retrieves the paragraph element with the ID output. So right over here. And in lines 26 through 30, it sets the inner HTML property of the output element to display the formatted date using various date objects. Now let's take a look at how this runs. And over here, we have the program running. In our next program, we'll be writing a PHP script that creates a variable states money sign states with the value Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, Massachusetts, Kansas. So let's begin with line 23. This marks the beginning of the PHP code block within the HTML document. So as you can see here, the doc type is HTML. We have an HTML block over here, beginning, end. Then of course, the beginning of PHP, the end of PHP. So on line 24, we create a string variable named states and assign it a value containing the names of several states separated by spaces. In line 25, we initialize an empty array, states array. This is empty, the brackets, there's nothing within the brackets, so it is empty. In line 26, we use the explode function to split the string contained in states into an array, states in, using spaces as the delimiter. Line 28, this line, okay, so this line starts the for each loop that iterates over each element in the states in array. Okay. It assigns each element to the variable myState. Line 29. This line uses preg match function to perform a regular expression match against the current state, myState. It checks if the state name ends with XAS. Line 30. If the state name matches the pattern, it assigns the state name to the first element of the states array. In line 33, we have another for each loop iterating over each state name in states in the states in array, assigning each to the variable myState2. This is also done again on line 38 and line 43. Now, on line 48, we have another for reach loop iterating over each element in the states array. The key of each element is assigned to the variable element and the value to the variable value. In line 49, this line prints the value of the current element, followed by is the element, followed by the key of the current element, followed by a new line character. Now let's take a look at how this PHP file runs. As you can see here, we have Kansas is the element 1, Massachusetts is the element 2, Alabama is the element 3. In our next PHP file, we'll write a, of course, PHP script that tests whether an email address is input correctly. So beginning with line 14 within the body of the file. So this line creates a heading, an H1 heading with the text email validator and aligns it to the center of the page. So in line 15, this line starts a form element with the action attribute. Set to an empty string. So the action attribute is set to an empty string. There's nothing within the quotations. This means the form will submit to the current page, and the method attribute is set to post. In lines 16 through 17, okay, so these lines, or this line, creates a text input field input, referring to line 17, labeled email, where users can enter their email address. The name attribute is set to email so that the entered value can be accessed in PHP. In line 18, this line creates a submit button with the text validate. When it is clicked, it will submit the form data to and the name attribute is set to submit. In line 21 through 22, here we have the beginning of the PHP file, or the beginning of the PHP block. So this block checks if the form has been submitted by checking if the submit button has been clicked. If it has been clicked, the PHP code inside the block will execute. Line 23 retrieves the value entered in the email input field and stores it in a variable mail. Line 24 uses the filter var function with the filter validate email filter to check if the value stored in mail is valid or is a valid email address. Line 25. So if the email address is valid, this line outputs a message indicating that the email is valid. So is a valid email address, as you can see here. Otherwise, if the email, or else, If the email is not valid, the line outputs a message indicating is not a valid email address. Let's see how this runs. Use an email address. And there we have it, a valid email address. In our final example, we have two files, a PHP file as well as a HTML file to run the program. We'll start with the PHP file. So the purpose of this question is to write a PHP script that obtains a URL and its description from a user and stores that information into a database using MySQL. Okay, so beginning with line 13, we have server name equals localhost. This assigns the value localhost to the variable server name, which represents the MySQL server location. And line 14, username equals root. So this assigns the root to the variable username, which represents the MySQL username. Line 15, the password for MySQL is as follows. Then on line 16, we assign the value URL, or we assign the value URL to the variable DB name, which represents the name of the MySQL database to connect to. Okay. In line 17, we create a new MySQL object name to establish a connection to the MySQL database using the provided server name, username, password, and database name. Okay, in line 19, we check if there was an error in establishing the database connection. If there was an error, it terminates the script and displays an error message indicating the reason for failure. In line 23, we retrieve the value of the URL field from the post request data and assign it to the variable URL. In line 24, we retrieve the value of the description field from the post request data and assign it to the variable description. In line 26, we construct an SQL query to insert the values of URL and description into the URL table. Okay, in lines 27 through 31, okay, we execute the SQL query. If the query is successful, it displays a success. It displays a message indicating that it was successful. If there is an error, it displays an error message along with the SQL query and the error description. In line 33, we construct an SQL query to select the URL and description fields from the URL table. In line 34, we execute the SQL query and store the result in the variable results. Okay, so next, line 36, This checks if the rows are returned by the SQL query. Line 37 outputs the HTML code to start a table with a header, rows for URL and description. Line 38 iterates through each row of the result set and assigns the current row to the variable row. Line 39 outputs HTML code for each row of data retrieved, displaying the URL and description values in separate table cells. Now let's take a look at the HTML file. Okay, so beginning with line 12, this line of code starts a form element with the action attribute set to homework 4 q6.php. This indicates that when the form is submitted, the data will be sent to the homework hw4 underscore q6.php file. The method attribute is set to post, indicating that the form data will be sent via HTTP post method. In line 13, we create a text input field labeled URL where users can enter a URL. The name attribute is set to URL so that the data can be identified when the form is submitted. In line 14, we create another text input field labeled description, where over here users can enter a description. The name attribute is set to description. This is for identification when the form is submitted. Now let's take a look at how this program looks when ran. Okay, and over here we would just type in, say, www. And we'll do this 2 more times essentially, and then we will just press the submit button. So I'll skip ahead. When skipping ahead, the resulting output will look something like this. Okay, and that concludes my overview of some HTML and PHP files. Thank you for watching and have a great day.